It's another Friday, another episode of the Zogby Report, real and unscripted. Those of you who have been with us right along know exactly what's going on. Those of you who are new, welcome. And Jeremy and I take a look at some of the major issues, mainly politics, but not always, but the main issues of the day, and each take a swing at some of those issues. We'll be with you for about 20-25 minutes. How you doing this week, Jared?
I'm great. You?
Yeah, good. Thanks. So this is real and unscripted, but I think the issues just kind of slap us in the face. So the debt ceiling bill, of course, I think is number one. The debt ceiling and adjustments to the budget passed actually with big margins in both the House and the Senate, considerable support from Democrats and from Republicans. Let me ask the first question then, just broadly. Is the country better for having done this?
Why don't you take a stab?
All right. Well, yes. Okay. And I think, in all honesty, as everyone must know by now, I am the Democrat on the screen, and essentially, we can't default. So, I mean, that's clear. But we also cannot continue piling on the national debt the way that we do. We were bound to hit a brick wall and a major crisis heading in this direction. So I do applaud the Republicans for insisting that there be some overall budget cuts. My quibble, as was the case on the Democratic side, was with where they were cutting, which was predictably domestic programs, but also assistance, much needed assistance to poor people, to veterans, and so on. But all in all, I think that the bill was a compromise, and I think it was a good thing. It had to be done, and done in this way. I think it's also positive that it was bipartisan in the final analysis, and that some real leadership was shown, I think, on both sides. Here's the thing that I may quibble about, though, just in general. There is a tendency now to shake hands. I just did it. I just applauded both sides for it. But should we be applauding congressmen and women for doing what they're supposed to be doing? Mm-hmm. I go back to, there was a majority leader of the U.S. Senate for many years, Mike Mansfield, Democrat, moderate, well respected. He was majority leader for quite a while. And in his final appearance on CBS's Face the Nation, the host introduced him, and he said, "I want to congratulate you for being honest and a man of integrity, and always doing what your conscience told you should do." And Mansfield, who was plain spoken and eloquent in his plain spokenness, said, "Why are you congratulating me for doing and being what I'm supposed to be doing? Are you congratulating me because I'm not corrupt? Are you congratulating me because I wasn't hyper partisan?" He said, "We need to develop a better standard for our public officials than the fact that they're just not corrupt." And so in this instance, the very fact that we ended on a bipartisan note and we got a job done, should we really be congratulating them for doing what they were supposed to be doing anyway?
Yeah. I see it a little differently. I mean, we keep revisiting this biannual drama, right? Yeah. Is the question, should they be doing what they're supposed to be doing, or should they be balancing the budget? Should we not be revisiting this drama, political theater once or twice a year. I think, to me, that gets at the core of the issue, that the handshake is going into perpetuity. That well, we call it a debt ceiling, but there is no debt ceiling because we keep raising it.
Mhm.
As you alluded to, there's going to come a time when that can't, you said we can't default. Well, you're right. We shouldn't default, but eventually I think there will be a default. And that's the government, and then contrast that with the consumer right now. And I just read today that credit card debt, personal debt, went to new highs, $17 trillion. And so what that signals is that Americans have, I wouldn't say burned through their savings, but they've tapped as much of their savings that they can. I bet many have completely burned through their savings, but I think others have reached a level that they're no longer comfortable tapping into. Hence, the need for excessive credit card use and credit card debt, with the backdrop of the rising cost of living. And at some point, there'll have to be a serious conversation about how do we deal with this. And rather than saying, well, these folks accomplished something, I'd say that they once again kicked the can down the road. And I don't know what that conversation looks like. And I don't like the framing of it in terms of, us, the cold-hearted austerity and the savior of the day to raise the debt ceiling. I don't really know what the language should be, but eventually it's going to have to be sound economics and cuts really across the board, I would think. But that's another discussion. So that's my alternate view.
Let me agree with you. And just a brief comment, then we'll move to the next topic. But don't hold me on these numbers. But roughly speaking, we're looking at a almost $3 trillion federal budget. And it used to be, I'm not sure, but roughly, we're looking at about 15% of our federal budget is servicing the debt. Translated, that means paying the interest. Translated to, everyday terms, that means making your minimum payment on what is owed. What we're looking at then is that among the largest items in the budget is just servicing the debt. That's about $450 to $500 billion being spent just to service the debt. So what's apparent to me is that, number one, what we have to do is go back to, and this is going to be painful for many, but go back to under Clinton. Al Gore headed the so-called Grace Commission that studied where the federal budget was just consumed, overwhelmed with waste. Under Obama, there was the Bowles-Simpson Commission, which did the same thing, looked at where the federal budget could be cut. Of course, in both instances, nothing happened because you're talking about people who had agencies, people who had initiatives, people who are contractors with the federal government resisting, cuts or elimination of their bread and butter. And so we just continue, as you point out, piling on this debt. But it is totally unsustainable to be paying that much money per year just to be making the minimum payments and just having the debt accumulate the way that it is. And so that leads me to my second and final point, and that is, no, we're not Argentina and we're not Angola, but there is such a thing as forgiving part of the debt. And that means, there are folks who possess bonds, who invested in bonds. There are banks that have lent money, and at what point then, as part of a comprehensive solution, trying to put the brakes on this and then turning it around in the correct direction, do we have some level of debt forgiveness? I remember we had a similar conversation in the early 90s with George H.W. Bush and then Bill Clinton. And the notion was that if we balance the budget and produce economic growth, as we did during the 1990s, we were able to pretty much turn what was an unimaginable debt of about $2 trillion into a surplus by the end of the decade. I just can't get my arms around a $32 trillion debt and see how any kind of economic growth can wipe that out. Final comment on that before we move on to the candidates?
No, I think you covered it.
All right, so we're talking about the GOP candidates because we have done that before, but we have some new candidates. We've got Christie, former governor, and then we have a former vice president who's about to announce as well, Mike Pence. And both bring some pluses and some differences to the race, but I guess the question is, what kind of impact will they have? So I'm going to suggest that first with Mike Pence, hard to see a path for him. He's to the nomination. He alienated the MAGA supporters. He was the vice president under Trump, but alienated a lot of MAGA supporters because of his stance actually upholding the Constitution and backing the winner of the 2020 election. And he's also running as a Christian conservative, and that may be a partial path to him, but probably just not enough. He's banking on the fact that as Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump just beat each other to a pulp, and here they are, they've already begun that process very, very early, that he slides in and wins the Iowa caucuses in 2024. He's right next door. He's from Indiana, and being a neighbor is always good. In addition, there's a very large and powerful Christian evangelical base within the Republican Party in Iowa, and that thrusts Mike Pence into the top tier of the race. So that's the one scenario that you have for Mike Pence. Plus the fact that you got to say he's from central casting when it comes to looking like a presidential candidate and looking like a president, at least the way a president used to. White-haired, good-looking gentleman, former broadcaster, as you may know, who's got the voice and the mannerisms as well. What do you think of Mike Pence as a candidate and as possible chance?
Yeah, I would say I don't think he has really a snowball chance in heaven or heck. I think that let's look at it this way. The Republican Party has kind of gone the version of woke on the right. That's what MAGA is.
That's interesting.
I think that's an interesting way to look at woke versus MAGA is that they're the extreme. They're almost like mirror images of each other coming from the right and the left. And I just don't see that, Mike Pence's temperament was better suited for the early 2000s. And in a post 2016 Republican playing field, I just don't see it. He definitely has that broadcaster thing, but watching him, he's over rehearsed. And I just don't think he can really excite much beyond a small base. So I think Trump continues to lead, and DeSantis is going to have to work on moving beyond the woke culture. The culture wars, and coming off as less arrogant. And I wouldn't rule him out yet. But and I just want to bring this up. I want to kind of change the conversation because look, we would do this if if Trump said something completely off the rails, which he tends to. We talk about it, right? And it's in the context that he's crazy. And so on the flip side, there's the phenomenon of Joe Biden being old and senile and not fit to be president. And he had a major tumble today. And I'm not going to make any predictions. And I know that the right-wing media are all over that. But I do have to say it doesn't look good for Joe Biden. I would be surprised if he makes it through the summer. I really would. And something tells me that the DNC, if not now, fairly soon, are going to want to see a couple or a few other candidates enter the race in place of Biden. Because at the end of the day, their greatest fear is a Trump-Biden redux, part two. They don't want to see that franchise. And so that's how I feel. I think as of today, I think the DNC's view, if not now, very soon, are going to question Biden's ability over the long run to defeat Donald Trump. 2020 was a different story. People will say, look at the amount of votes Biden got in 2020. That was a different story. That was 4 years ago.
So everybody who's been listening knows I'm going to repeat it. I like Joe Biden, and I do believe as a historian as well, Joe Biden will go down in history as top 10 or top 12 among the greatest presidents we've ever had. There's a genuine record of accomplishment, not only in terms of averting crises, but moving the country forward. With that said, I'm on the Biden watch as well. I saw the tumble. I saw it several times because the CBS News played it several times this morning. And it is an issue. It's an issue for supporters as well as detractors, because I think there's a sense out there among supporters that of hanging on every word and every video and seeing when he's going to once and for all trip, both literally and figuratively. The irony is this conversation is dominating discussions at a time when Labor Department just reported a couple of hours ago 337,000 new jobs created. Unemployment went up from 3.5 to 3.7, but that's because more Americans joined the workforce. Wages were up as well, and yet we're talking about the health of the presidency. I've got to think that as an essential backdrop to all of this, that Biden's approval numbers are going in the wrong direction right now. He's at about 42% approval with good economic news, with a budget deal, bipartisanship. You would think that his numbers would be going back up in a positive direction. I do wonder if his initial decision to decide to run is going to be overturned, and possibly just simply overturned by himself, realizing that, hey, good things may be happening, but folks just aren't buying it. And like you say, it was a different story in 2020. Folks were looking, I think, for some comfort, some stability, an end to the Trump era. But this time around, just a sense that maybe, a new generation, the torch may be passed.
Yeah.
To generation.
Well, it's clearly that's the case for among independent voters, but more and more within the Democratic Party. And so those two right there, it would have to be a monumental task for him to overcome that and to go into the general election against whoever that's going to be, more than likely Trump.
So I'm going to build on a topic you and I have actually talked about quite a bit privately, but now we're going to talk publicly. One of the things that I think is very troubling about the Democratic Party and about President Biden himself is steering the primary process in a direction that, quote, assures him of renomination. I do believe that South Carolina does make sense as a very early state, simply because it represents the diversity within the Democratic Party. But I do believe that it was a serious mistake doing two things. One, bumping Iowa and New Hampshire from the early process. That was a system that actually was working. And in New Hampshire, as you and I have discussed, it's state law. So here's kind of a national encroachment, national party encroachment, violating a state law and punishing a state if candidates are actually run in the New Hampshire primary. The second issue that I have consistent with that is that the Biden team has already said there are not going to be any debates. And there is not only a tone of arrogance, but there's a tone of rigging the game for your favorite candidate that I think doesn't play well ultimately. And where we have polls that show that voters do want a debate, and that voters in New Hampshire actually are quite angry about the situation of being displaced. So one of our avid friends and followers, Michael Carmichael, just wrote a memo that I read right before we got on, saying that Democratic Party needs to be democratic with a D, that there needs to be a healthy debate. But what do you think? You think that? What do you think?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. This is the party that once had my allegiance and no longer does. Of course, listeners know that I don't have a political party home, but the Democratic Party once had me because I thought that they spoke truth to power, and they really have. I do believe they've become the party of Wall Street and big money, and I think these kind of moves go against their principles of what they were supposed to stand up, and I think it's not shocking that Biden and his people would prefer to make decisions that would benefit the results for them. That's not shocking, but at a time where many independent Democrat leaning Democrat, like independent voters who lean Democrat, as well as members within the party, that I do believe there are a growing number of disaffected Democrats. The last thing to do is to pour this on an already growing flame. I think you said it very well. It's not democratic, and it's certainly not going to help their position. If they want to reinvigorate the party of the people, then this is the last thing they want to do, is shut down debate and allow for different voices within the party to emerge and allow the voters to choose how they align with those messages or not.
Well, I can't think of a happier note to end on than you're saying to me that I said it very well. So I say thank you. We're in fundamental agreement, and that's always a good thing. But I'm sure we'll be disagreeing on some things heading forward. Have a good week, okay?
Yeah, you too.